Good evening, I'm Stephen Maven, and this is The Dark Side, where I explore the darkest shadows of crime. Tonight, I'm taking you down the rabbit hole. That is, the Johnny Gosch story, possibly one of the most famous child disappearances in American history. Definitely one of the oldest unsolved cases. Johnny was among the first missing kids to appear on a milk carton. Yes, this case is that old. John David Gosch was a paper boy in West Des Moines, Iowa. He vanished in the early morning hours. On September 5th, 1982, he's presumed to have been kidnapped while delivering his papers that he loaded on a red wagon. Let's dive in. Johnny Gosch. He was only 2 months away from his 13th birthday. He was young, he was ambitious, and he was very responsible for a 12-year-old. Every morning he was up by 5 o'clock and on his way, delivering his papers between 6 and 7 a.m. One brisk September morning, Johnny went off as usual, only this time he never came back. Let's get into it.
If you love nostalgia and true crime, you won't want to miss this story. Meet Johnny. Johnny was only 12 years old in 1982. He was only 2 months away from his 13th birthday. He lived a happy, healthy life in West Des Moines, Iowa. He was a normal kid, not unlike the average kid living in Des Moines. He was a vibrant and ambitious soul. He was also a paper boy, and each day he kicked off at 5 a.m. He was reliable and responsible. He never missed a day. Each morning he would pull his red wagon to the paper drop and collect his newspapers. On his free time, he liked to play with his friends, usually cruising the neighborhood on their bicycles. Johnny also loved to tear it up on his dirt bike. He was a smart kid too. He did very well in school. But life has a way of turning ordinary days into extraordinary tales. As for the rest of Johnny's story, well, that depends on who you ask.
It depends on who you ask. All right? This case has more variations than the LGBTQ community. This case has more turns than the latest roller coaster. More twists than a Twizzler. This case is indeed a rabbit hole. Let's continue watching.
One early morning in September 1982, he set out early, pulling his red wagon loaded with newspapers. By the time the sun began to rise, he was nowhere to be seen. Witnesses reported seeing him talking to a man in a blue car. The interaction seemed friendly at first, but then things took a dark turn. But by the time anyone could react, both he and the car were gone. The police initially treated the situation as a runaway case, a decision that would later face immense criticism. His parents, especially his mother, never believed that he ran away. They were convinced something else had happened. Volunteers scoured the area, posters were put up. Years passed, and the case grew colder. The story of this boy is a tragic reminder of how quickly a life can change. A boy who once rode his bike and delivered papers became the subject of one of the most enduring mysteries in true crime history.
And that's what everybody agrees. From here, the case becomes a tangled web. A web of conspiracies, pedophile rings, cover-ups, high-profile involvement. This case has so many stories that go in so many different directions, it will make one's head spin. Let's have a listen
In 1982, the disappearance of 12-year-old Johnny Gosch sent shockwaves through the small town of West Des Moines, Iowa. The disappearance of this young boy sparked an extensive police investigation and garnered national media attention. This account will cover the earliest investigation into Johnny's disappearance. We'll look at the initial police investigation and into their initial beliefs. Then we'll discuss how their investigation expanded as new evidence came to light.
The initial hours and days following Johnny's disappearance were a blur of activity. Law enforcement agencies, with the help of countless volunteers, scoured the area. They hoped for a quick resolution, praying for the best but fearing the worst. Theories about what might have happened to Johnny began to emerge, each one a painful possibility for his distraught family. One of the initial theories focused on Johnny running away. Perhaps some speculated the pressures of his paper route or some unknown personal issue had led him to leave. This theory, however, was quickly dismissed. Johnny was known as a responsible and happy boy with no apparent reason to run away. He was also close to his family, making it unlikely he would willingly leave without a trace. Another theory considered whether Johnny might have had an accident. Could he have fallen into a ditch or wandered into a dangerous area? Search parties meticulously combed through fields, parks, and any potential hazards in and around West Des Moines. Again, their efforts yielded no answers. No sign of Johnny, no discarded belongings, no indication of an accident could be found. As time passed and the investigation deepened, the possibility of a more sinister scenario, one that chilled the community to its core, began to take hold. Scant evidence, mounting frustration. The investigation stalls. The lack of concrete leads left investigators grappling with more questions than answers. The investigation into Johnny's disappearance quickly became one of the most extensive in Iowa's history. Detectives painstakingly interviewed potential witnesses, chasing every lead and rumor, hoping for a break in the case. However, the evidence remained frustratingly elusive. The witness accounts, while providing some initial direction, were often fragmented or contradictory. Some recalled seeing Johnny talking to a man in a car, but descriptions of the individual and the vehicle varied. Others reported seeing Johnny alone on his route, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. The inconsistencies, though understandable, given the shock and confusion surrounding the event, made it difficult for investigators to piece together a clear narrative of what transpired that fateful morning. The lack of physical evidence further hampered the investigation. No fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic clues were found that conclusively pointed to what happened to Johnny. The case, once teeming with potential avenues, was slowly turning cold. Despite the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the unwavering support of the community, the mystery of Johnny Gosch's disappearance deepened, leaving a cloud of uncertainty and fear hanging over West Des Moines.
Disappointed in the progress of the police, Noreen Gosch, Johnny's mother, decided to take things into her own hands. She went from bereaved mother to detective to crusader for justice. And boy, does she have a story to tell. Noreen's story adds a new twist to the corkscrew.
Media descended upon West Des Moines, eager to cover the story. News crews camped out on Noreen's front lawn, capturing her every move. Noreen's determination resonated with viewers across the country. The attention brought forth a deluge of tips and theories. Noreen meticulously followed every lead, driven by the belief that one piece would lead her back to Johnny. She became a familiar face on television screens and in newspapers. Throughout her ordeal, Noreen encountered unwavering support from her community. Fueled by an unbreakable bond with her son, she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. The initial hours following Johnny's disappearance were a blur of panic and confusion. Noreen, grappling with the unthinkable, frantically contacted authorities. But instead of the immediate response she expected, Noreen was met with a frustrating delay. Local law enforcement assumed missing children were often runaways, requiring a waiting period. For Noreen, every tick of the clock without Johnny was an eternity. The 72-hour waiting period felt like an insurmountable obstacle. She knew her son would never willingly abandon his route or his family. Johnny was not the type of child to run away. He was responsible, loved, and expected home. Noreen's pleas for immediate action seemed to fall on deaf ears. The authorities, bound by protocol, treated Johnny's case as routine. They assured her he would likely turn up soon. Their words only fueled Noreen's growing anger and despair. As hours turned into days, Noreen's frustration with law enforcement intensified. She felt crucial time was slipping away, diminishing their chances of finding Johnny. Noreen's gut instinct screamed that something sinister had occurred. Determined to take matters into her own hands, Noreen refused to sit idly by. She knew her son was in grave danger. Ignoring limitations, Noreen launched her own search, rallying neighbors and friends. Her home became a command center, buzzing with energy. Noreen, fueled by grief, became the heart of the operation. She personally interviewed witnesses and pursued every lead. Her efforts began to yield results.
Undeterred by skepticism, Noreen pressed on, her resolve hardening with each passing day. She connected with other families, sharing stories and resources. She was desperate for any clues. That's when she began to hear whispers of a dark underworld. The deeper she dug, she began to uncover stories of organized rings involved in child abduction. As Noreen delved deeper, a chilling pattern emerged. She paid failed ransoms. She met with shady witnesses in shady places. She would never give up the search for her son. Noreen's advocacy changed the conversation around missing children forever.
Years passed, each one a cruel reminder of Johnny's absence. The initial frenzy surrounding the case faded from the headlines. But for Johnny Gosch, the passage of time did little to dull the pain. She refused to let her son's memory fade. Then, in 1985, a glimmer of hope emerged. A letter postmarked Saginaw, Michigan, arrived at Noreen's doorstep. The words claimed to hold the key to unraveling the mystery. Meyer's letter, a mix of chilling confessions and desperate pleas, offered a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He claimed to have information about Johnny's whereabouts and the identities of those responsible, but his knowledge came at a price, a hefty sum for Johnny's safe return. Torn between skepticism and hope, Noreen grappled with the decision. Authorities urged caution, fearing she might jeopardize any chance of recovering her son, but Noreen, driven by a mother's love, felt she had no other choice. The exchange, shrouded in secrecy, took place on a desolate stretch of highway. The vast emptiness mirrored the storm in Noreen's heart. As she handed over the money, fear and anticipation coursed through her veins. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of years of searching. But instead of a joyous reunion, Noreen's hopes were crushed. Meyer, the supposed savior, disappeared with the money, leaving broken promises. Authorities, though sympathetic, were frustrated with her decision. They had warned her, emphasizing the risks and likelihood of deceit. In the aftermath, Noreen faced criticism and accusations. Some questioned her judgment, driven by emotion rather than logic. Others suggested she fabricated the ordeal to revive a cold case. The weight of judgment threatened to crush Noreen's spirit. She had risked everything for the slim chance of bringing Johnny home. Now, left with empty promises, she questioned everything.
Years passed and the mystery of Johnny Gosch's disappearance deepened. Then a chilling new theory emerged. Could Johnny have been the victim of a pedophile ring? In the years since Johnny's disappearance, several other young boys had vanished under similar circumstances. The idea of a pedophile ring operating across state lines, snatching children from their communities, was almost too terrifying to contemplate. This theory, once relegated to the fringes of the investigation, began to gain traction. As the pedophile ring theory took hold, investigators began to focus on several key figures. One name that surfaced repeatedly was Paul Bonacci, a convicted child sex abuser. Bonacci claimed to have been part of a nationwide pedophile ring and alleged involvement in Johnny's abduction. Another name that emerged was Lawrence King Jr., a wealthy Omaha businessman convicted in 1988 on charges related to a child sex trafficking ring. Although there was no direct evidence linking King to Johnny's disappearance, the similarities were too striking to ignore. The investigation also explored possible connections to organized crime. The possibility of powerful and well-connected individuals being involved only added to the complexity and danger of the investigation.
The case cooled down when the whispers quieted and the leads dried up. But the pedophile ring theory got new legs when some disturbing Polaroids came into the mix. Let's take a dive down this tunnel.
While no concrete evidence has ever definitively linked Johnny Gosch's disappearance to a pedophile ring, several disturbing clues have fueled speculation. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence is the testimony of other alleged victims. In addition to Paul Bonacci, several other individuals have come forward claiming to have been victims of the same pedophile ring. Another piece of evidence is the discovery of strange photographs sent to Johnny Gosch. While the boys in the photos were never definitively identified as Johnny, the images were deeply unsettling. Furthermore, there is the matter of the $2 bills with strange markings appearing in circulation throughout the Midwest. These bills were believed by some to be a form of communication within the alleged pedophile ring.
Johnny Gosch would open any can of worms and gladly dig up high-profile secrets if it meant getting to see her son. Over 15 years later, Noreen finally got to see her son again, so she believes anyway. Johnny Gosch, now in his late 20s and accompanied by a dark, suspicious companion, visited Noreen in the wee hours of the morning. The meeting took place on her front porch. It was brief, interrupted by a stranger in the shadows insisting it's time to go, and the two disappeared into the night. Was it really Johnny, or a cruel prank? Noreen insists that it was her son. Let's listen.
Years turned into decades. The memory of Johnny Gosch faded from the public consciousness. Yet Noreen never surrendered to despair. She continued to chase every lead. The pain of his absence had become a constant companion. Then, one chilly March night in 1997, the impossible seemed to materialize. A sharp rap on the door jolted her awake. It was 2:30 a.m. Her heart pounded as she cautiously approached the entrance. Standing on her porch was a young man. He looked to be in his late 20s. His face held a familiar warmth. Hesitantly, she opened the door. "Johnny?" she whispered. Time seemed to stand still as mother and son stood on that threshold, separated by years of unanswered questions and unimaginable heartache. Noreen's gaze swept over the young man's face, searching for any trace of the boy she had lost, clinging to the belief that this was not a cruel trick of her weary mind. "Mom, it's me," the young man said, his voice a low murmur thick with emotion. He unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a birthmark on his chest, a small faded mark shaped like a crescent moon, a mark only she knew about. It was a secret they shared, a tiny imperfection that had become a symbol of their unbreakable bond. Tears streamed down Noreen's face as she reached out, her hand trembling to touch his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, his presence, though tentative, undeniably real. In that instant, all the doubts, the years of agonizing uncertainty melted away. Her Johnny, her little boy, had come home. But this was not the joyous reunion she had dreamt of countless times. A palpable tension hung in the air, a sense of urgency that belied the quiet intimacy of the moment. Johnny, though clearly relieved to see her, seemed nervous, his gaze darting towards a shadowy figure standing just beyond the edge of the porch light. "Who is that with you?" Noreen asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the shadowy figure who remained just out of sight. Johnny hesitated, his eyes flickering between his mother and the man concealed in the darkness. "It's not safe to talk here," he mumbled, his words rushed and low as if someone else might overhear. He explained that he had been living under an assumed identity, unable to reveal his true self, always looking over his shoulder, fearing that the past would catch up with him. The details of his abduction, the years he had endured, remained unspoken, shrouded in a veil of secrecy that he seemed unwilling or unable to pierce. The man in the shadows stepped forward, his face still hidden from view. His voice, deep and gravelly, sent a shiver down Noreen's spine. "He can't stay long," the man said, his tone brooking no argument. "They're watching. They'll be looking for him." Noreen's heart sank. She had longed for this moment, prayed for the day her son would return. But she had never imagined it like this, shrouded in fear, cloaked in secrecy, the threat of unseen enemies lurking in the shadows. The visit was brief, a bittersweet taste of a reunion that couldn't be. Johnny, eyes filled with love and regret, embraced his mother tightly, promising to return. Then, with a last lingering look, he vanished into the night, leaving Noreen standing on her porch. Overcome with frustration, Noreen contacted the authorities, desperate to share the news, but her story was met with skepticism. The years had taken their toll on her credibility. The failed ransom attempt had cast a long shadow over her claims. The police, though sympathetic, needed tangible evidence. Without concrete proof, they were powerless to act. Years continued to slip away, each one a painful reminder of the elusive truth surrounding Johnny's disappearance. The late-night visit left Noreen with more questions than answers. She continued to speak out, to keep Johnny's memory alive.
40-some odd years later, we're still talking about Johnny Gosch, Noreen Gosch. Despite hits to her credibility and the backlash she received, prevailed and kept marching on. In 2000, Noreen published her book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home. In June 2024, she re-released that book with updates and new chapters. If you'd like to dive into her rabbit hole deeper, I suggest you buy her new book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, by Noreen Gosch, the official book, updated for 2024. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Maven, and this is The Dark Side, exploring the shadows of true crime. I'll see you next time.